This is a monthly online event presented by the Atlanta Chapter of the Horror Writers Association. We will be spotting both Atlanta Horror Writers Association members plus members from around the world. I love the skeleton hour hosted by HWA, which is a monthly panel discussion. The most recent one was with the team who brought us the excellent anthology Black Cranes. Also, the New York chapter of HWA is hosting Galactic Nightmares, which is on the second Thursday of every month. And you know, another reason to tune in is next month, Atlanta's Jeff Strand will be appearing as a guest on the Galactic Nightmares. So pencil that in for your December 10th evening. So, and please let us know if you hear of more upcoming readings so that we can help signal boost and support our community. So I'm Alex Hofelich. I'm your host for this event. I'm one of the editors over at Pseudopod, and we've been bringing short horror fiction to your ears every week for free for the last 14 years. I'm honored to be working with Peter Salomon and Kitty Sarkozy and Jessica Ann York to bring this event to you. The Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association features a Nightmare of the Month. This is typically a publication from one of our chapter members, and we read and talk about it on and off social media. We're growing this program so we can highlight some of our members who are doing excellent work in nonfiction, audio, graphic arts, and other facets of horror. For example, next month, we will be showcasing one of our members who focuses on audio fiction, and early in 2021, we're going to center one of our readings on nonfiction. Now, November's Nightmare of the Month is The Seeking, which is a standalone YA novel by Marlena Frank. Marlena has always been fascinated with monsters and now gets to write about them. She's been writing horror and fantasy short stories since 2010 and has had her work published in a number of anthologies, from Heroic Fantasy Quarterly to The Siren's Call. Her YA dark fantasy novella, The She-Wolf of Kanta, was released in 2018 from Aurelia Leo. Her debut novel, Stolen, came out January 2019 from the Parliament House Press. And on release day, it became an Amazon bestseller in the YA category. Marlena also serves as vice president of the Atlanta chapter and is spearheading several of our initiatives, including expanding our communications from social media to newsletters. So considering the evolution we're doing for Nightmare of the Month, Marlena, what do you like about this effort, and what sorts of things do you want to see the chapter tackle in 21?
Well, I really like that we're doing more outreach and that we're trying to get out to more diverse people and bringing that kind of voice into our chapter. I think Atlanta has a lot of great opportunity for that kind of reach for our chapter, especially simply because we're giving voice to a lot of horror voices that have been here, and we're kind of putting them up on a platform and letting people take notice of them more. And I think that's one of the real benefits that we have here.
I agree. That's awesome. And yeah, looking forward to everything we can do next year. Another thing that I love is books that have nuanced and intricate games that the fates balance on, and then have it all on the run up to Halloween. And I get to put this on a shelf next to Zelazny's A Night in the Lonesome October. So each seeking on Hallows Eve, the magic that protects the town of Kara must be renewed. Which means the children of the Exalted family must go into hiding. Whether it be through disguise or bribe, through trusted friends or perfect hiding places, every child of the priest family must avoid capture for a full day. Then this tense game of hide and go seek goes wrong. So what are your favorite aspects of Halloween, and which of those threads did you pull into this novel?
Well, Halloween itself is all about disguising yourself to not be seen by evil spirits, which, are seen to be more rampant around this time of year when the, veil gets thin. And I really pulled on that for the seeking because the whole goal is to hide from pursuers. And in this situation, it's not, evil spirits as much as it's the fellow townspeople, because everyone wants to become the new Exalted family. Everyone wants to get into the Exalted house. And so the children of the Exalted family get chased Instead of evil spirits, it's, greedy townspeople, pretty much.
That's wonderful. Well, do you want to, what else do you want to set up for us before you go into your reading tonight?
So the scene I'm going to be reading is going to be Dahlia and her siblings go into a forest that's heading towards the gully, about midway through the book. The gully was one part of Kara that was empty most days. Nobody liked going there. It flooded in the spring when the rains came and would occasionally turn into an icy pond if it got cold enough during the fall and winter. But somehow, for each seeking, it was dry and barren, and the elder trees that lined it flourished despite the unpredictable weather. It was as though their roots went so deep into the earth that the floodwaters had no effect on them. It was forbidden to cut them down, so the elders had grown tightly together, their spindly limbs tangled and indistinguishable from another. Pathways that were used the year before would be impassable the following year. Getting to the center of the gully required stepping over limbs, ducking under others, and figuring out what turns to take in order to pass through without going in circles. As I approached, I noticed the tree's lovely white flowers from summer had fallen away. Now their limbs held plump blackberries out for hungry passers-by, but everyone in Kara knew better. These berries weren't for consumption. Other elder trees you might pick freely from and even eat the flowers, but these were poison. Some said just plucking one could cause madness. I walked the edge of the gully where the thick wall of elders began, Damien's hand gripping mine. Mother and father would have already arrived, but all children were to enter separately from the parents. Others were straggling in as well. Some stood at the wall waiting to be led through the maze of tree branches. I had already been told exactly how to enter, so I led. I'm going to skip ahead a bit to where they enter. For a moment, the woods were silent, and then I heard very light footsteps, not from behind us or even in front, but from the side. They weren't the same heavy, noisy footsteps we made through the underbrush. No, they were so delicate that it could have been the sound of falling leaves. I pushed Damien behind me and heard him gasp, but he knew better than to speak. We had lived in Kara our whole lives, so we knew exactly what walked like that. Derek's eyes were wide as we each stepped back to the entrance of the clearing, ready to bolt. That was when the gray person came into view. Sticks and brambles that would have scraped my skin dragged against her legs, but she didn't seem to care. The gray people were made of hardier things than flesh and blood. Even in the diminished sunlight, her skin gleamed like ashy wood. The black pits where her eyes ought to be were fixed in our direction, and she pushed a sapling out of the way with a taloned hand. Did I mention that the gray people were always nude? She was no exception, but I had never seen their bodies so distinctively before. It was like she had been carved out of wood, and the slight indentions of the blade could still be seen on the surface of her skin, sometimes in spirals and sometimes extending all the way down a limb. I might have considered her beautiful if she wasn't so terrifying. She gave us a cruel smile, and Damien gasped again. Her gaze darted to him like a cat watching an injured bird, and Derek and I closed in the gap between us to keep her from seeing our brother. A hoarse laugh escaped her crude mouth. "Don't worry, little ones. He's not the one I'm after today." I remembered Broskow talking about its eyes, that they were how it fed from him. With a little bubble of panic in my chest, I looked away from its gaze, though it was surprisingly difficult to do so. If it was hard for me to look away from it when I was already on guard, it must have been terribly difficult for Broskow that night. Finally, the gray person turned away from us and moved through the underbrush toward the gully. I noticed that where she walked, the elder trees parted for her. A shiver went through me. "Are you two okay?" Derek asked in a wavering voice. Damien squeaked his affirmation. "Dahlia?" I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be okay again, but I had to say something. He was being the protective older brother, just like he had been when that jerk tried to threaten us earlier. All the hair in my arms were standing on end, though, and I couldn't shake the image of its hollow eyes from mine. What do you think it meant? I asked finally. I don't know, Derek said. I could see now that his hands were trembling, though he was trying to hide them. But at least it's not after us. He led the way again as we followed the path the gray person had made toward the gully. Up ahead, I could smell the sickeningly sweet aroma of freshly baked apple pie. Derek might feel better knowing the gray person wasn't after us, but I didn't. Who was it after?
So the family and relationships in this book are so artfully crafted, and it's fun to visit this town that's protected by these gray people from the deadly critters that stalk the boundary lines. And I love the use of what are arguably monsters to defend the town from other monsters.
You have to choose your enemies carefully, you know what I mean?
Right.
You have your enemy.
What did you enjoy the most about setting up this conflict?
I like how you think that the monsters are one thing at the beginning, but towards the end you realize that it's a lot more complicated than that. I really enjoyed the gray people and crafting that whole, that whole types of creatures and everything like that regarding them, because they're I've always wanted to make a monster that was kind of like a tree-like horrific thing, because something like that could easily move between really thick woods or something. I always I grew up around a lot of trees, so it was easy to imagine what could be moving around out there without my knowing. So
And there's always the the noises of whatever it is out there. Yeah, it's probably a deer or a raccoon or
probably.
somebody's somebody's dog, but we can hope.
Yeah, yeah.
The
The more
imagination.
remote you get, the harder it is to explain sometimes. And sometimes sound will act weird, like coyotes, at night will sound one way on certain nights and sound completely different on another night. So then you're like, what did I just hear? And you're like, oh, it's just coyotes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, get coyotes and foxes and owls and
Yep.
yeah, and we kind of have that primal need to be afraid of the dark
Yeah.
and afraid of what's out in the woods. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and looking forward to a lot of people getting to read and enjoy this one.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
So being part of a large chapter comes with the privilege of being able to, we've got a lot of folks, like-minded folks with us, and it's easy to reach out and touch other people. With the Southern Nightmare reading series, it was important to us as a chapter to boost voices outside of our immediate field of view and reach out and provide opportunities for other folks to share our space, and be able to boost other voices. So we're honored to welcome our first special guest and former Atlanta chapter member who has moved to New England to be closer to Salem and the Miskatonic. So Kat Scully is the writer and illustrator of the LGBTQIA YA horror series Jennifer Strange from Haverhill House Publishing. Kat is best known for her world maps, which have been featured in Brooklyn Brujas trilogy by Zoraida. Thank you, Zoraida Cordova, Winterspell by Claire Legrand, and Give the Dark My Love by Beth Rivas. Kat works as a user interface designer for Deep End Games on their next title, Romancylvania. So that one really begs for some additional clarification. Is this Castlevania tangled up with The Bachelor? Tell us about Romancylvania and this project.
Oh, happily. So it's absolutely The Bachelor meets Castlevania, and we're currently running a Kickstarter on it right now, but today is the last day. So you have till 11 a.m. to help us get it funded. But basically, it's like dating meets combat. So you're able to advance your skill set, get certain items, the deeper you make your relationships or your friendships. So it's up to you. And you can play as a female drac or a male drac. You can do as little romance as you want and as much fighting as you want. And it's just player choice. We really wanted to give them choice, but it's sort of our team's love song to Castlevania and to games like that and to Dracula and to monsters dating monsters. It's just a whole lot of fun. I loved making it. I worked on the logo. I worked on the user interface, which is your health bar, magic bar, icons. I'm the one who did the Meatball Palace, if you've seen the trailer. So it
And
was a lot of fun.
that's awesome. And yeah, user interface is something that is underappreciated. It's the thing that hooks us in and, allows us to move past the frame and get into the immersion. So, you know,
Yes, exactly. So I'm very interested. I mean, storytelling in and of itself of like, how do you connect the player to really immerse themselves in the game? How do they feel like, okay, it's easy to find my inventory. So I'm still like, I am this character, like, how do I want to equip it? I think my favorite thing about the game is that we have a weapons motel bed where you can pair weapons and with crystals that you've gotten through your relationships and customize everything. But I worked on the weapons, so that might be why it's my favorite. I never thought I'd get to draw swords, but that was a good day.
that's, that's awesome. That sounds like so much fun.
So much. I really hope we get funded. Fingers crossed. So please go check out our Kickstarter. It's
Yeah,
still live till tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern.
awesome. Well, so are you sharing something from Jennifer Strange with us tonight?
I am. I'm so excited to share a chapter from the middle of Jennifer Strange, which is the first in a series. And I'm hoping we'll put out the next one next year. We're kind of waiting to see how COVID goes. Well, I wanted to pick, I don't know if many people know this is also illustrated. So the scene I'm going to be reading from does actually have art with it, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you'll be able to see when I show it on the screen, but there's Marcus here, Marcus Blackwell, and Ashley Gerard and Jennifer Strange. And basically, at this point in the story, Jennifer's sister, her older sister Liz, who she hasn't spoken to ever since their mom died, has been taken by a banshee. And she has to go get her back, but doesn't know where the banshee's taken her. So she's asked Marcus Blackwell, who's kind of he's the local legend of everything occult, everything ghosts. He knows it. His family knows it. So everyone goes to him when they're in trouble with the many spirits of Savannah, Georgia. And Ashley's her new friend she's met at her new school. And they're trying to go find Liz and get her back. Let me see. Oh, I lost my page. One sec. Okay. The pendulum shook as it pointed in the direction of Northwinds High School, turning Marcus's attention away from me. He sprinted down the road, forcing Ashley and I to jog in order to catch up with him. We dodged past a romantic couple as they stumbled with 2 red cups full of brown liquid. I kept forgetting people were allowed to walk around the city with alcoholic beverages. Back home, you rarely saw people drink except at restaurants and festivals. It was so unusual to have such a lax rule this deep in the Bible Belt South, but that's Savannah for you. We turned down another street I recognized. The golden dome of City Hall peeked over the trees, and the setting sun reflected off its surface, casting the surrounding treetops in a warm glow. I breathed in the smell of salt water rising up from the river, and my shoulders relaxed a little. A low purr of thunder crackled in the distance, and I turned towards the east. Clouds billowed in the direction of the sea. We need to get to Northwinds before the sky opened up again. Rage burned like a struck match inside my heart as my body roared with the need to release all my fury to the banshee for taking my sister. I'd unleash everything into her until she shattered. Let my mark spread. I didn't care. I could figure out how to reverse it after I tore the banshee apart. Marcus turned the corner and skidded to a halt. What is it now? Ashley said. Sorry, he said. It's just, look. He pointed down Bull Street towards Johnson Square, where while the rest of the city sparkled with bustling people, cars, and the blaring sun, the square and its surrounding buildings were completely dark. as if it were midnight, but only on this one street. The hairs on the backs of my arms raised. There were no people, not a single pedestrian, tourist, or even a dog walker. Everyone was walking around it, away from it, unconsciously avoiding the area. They passed by as though Bull Street wasn't even there. "This is really bad," Marcus said. "I don't like the sound of that," Ashley said. "It's the other." He pocketed his pendulum. "In places that become very haunted, a sort of veil spreads through the area. But this entity has to be really toxic to poison a place like this." "The other?" My ears perked. "What is that?" "It's the realm between the living and the dead," he said. "Spirits get trapped there on their way to the other side because they can't break cycles that occurred when they were alive. It's usually because they have committed horrible crimes like violence or murder, or because of major emotions like guilt or longing. They wander the other trapped in their own personal hell." An icy wave of fear ran from my spine down to my toes. I knew that already. Somehow, I knew. The living can't see the other, can they? I stepped aside to let a mother with a stroller by. "They're not even looking at it." "No," said Marcus. "They're aware of it in a subconscious way. You know the shiver you get looking down a dark, empty hallway when you know something is there you can't see? That's the other. That's why they're avoiding north winds. They know. They just can't put their finger on why." Liz and I followed Marcus down the misty road, away from City Hall towards Johnson Square. It was so dark I had to pull out my flashlight out of the duffel bag in order to see. It illuminated the road and the sidewalk, but not much else. The rest was all fog. "Maybe you should lead," Ashley offered. "You have the light." Marcus pocketed the pendulum. "She's right. We we know where the Banshee is now. Light the way, Sparrow." "Okay," I said, not at all nervous, not at all still angry at Marcus. I took the lead, lighting the way down Bull Street. The beginning of the road was mostly nondescript buildings and white walls. When we reached the fork, I turned right at the obelisk with lush foliage surrounding the monument in Johnson Square. Our group took it slowly as we approached the front gate of North Winds. Yellow caution tape flickered around a thick chain that hung heavily and wrapped around the iron of the gate. Thick gray fog blotted out the rest of the landscape and brick buildings. I peered between the shuttered ironwork. The windows did not reflect the light emanating from the nearby street lamps, and thick oak branches moaned as they collided with each other in a whistling wind. Marcus shook the gate to try and break in, but the chain only rattled. "There must be another way," I said. He pointed at the cafe next door. "There's a back way through the kitchen. We hop the wall and go in through the greenhouse at the back of the school." "Well, no sense waiting," Ashley said, pushing past him. "Let's go." A little bell chimed as she opened the door to the cafe. No one stood in the entranceway behind the podium. There were no servers or people waiting for tables. I touched the podium and found the list of reservations. The colors were all muted, even the highlighter that ran across the table names. I backed away. The saturation on the world had turned down halfway, painting everything into shades of gray. Marcus and Ashley followed me through the foyer into the seating area. The tables were all laid out for dinner, flatware, napkins, half-full glasses, plates of steaming food, but nobody sat in the chairs. The restaurant was completely empty. "Hello?" My words carried like lines delivered on stage to an empty theater, and the sound of my voice fell flat. "Is anyone here?" "So weird," Ashley said as she approached the bar area. There was a drink at every stool, but no one was there to drink them. In the back, a stage sat covered with instruments, a sax, trumpets, guitars, bass, and a full drum kit. Beyond the bar, a staircase led to an upper level with more seating. "What the hell?" She picked up a glass of alcohol off the bar. The trickle of condensation ran down the side of the glass. Ice the size of golf balls clinked around inside the amber liquid. If the ice was still whole, the drink was fresh. Someone had just left it there only moments ago. She put down the glass and examined one of the knives on the table, used the tip to poke a flank of steak. Steam rose off the muted pink setter. "It's like Dorothy," Ashley said, "only we're traveling back to Kansas from Oz. Where is the color?" "Because it's the world, but not quite the world," he said, running his hand along a table set for two. "Ghosts live in the world without taste, without feeling, without any kind of pleasure." I could see why they wanted to escape, why the ghosts yearned for my power so badly. If I were stuck here, I would do anything to get out. I glanced down at my mark and swallowed hard. Even in this dampened world, I shimmered.
I love the use of Savannah. Savannah is such a cool town, and it's, there's not enough people know how awesome it is.
Oh, it really is, for sure. I loved visiting there to write the book and really put those details in, like every street name. I studied the entire thing to get it all right.
Yeah. So you included artwork and graphic novel style pages interspersed throughout this book. What inspired you to play with the YA novel format?
I think because when I originally wrote it, it was a TV pilot. And I saw it all as storyboards in my head. I saw it all as pictures, and I felt like I wanted to show other people what I was seeing in my mind. And I was an illustrator, so I could draw it. And I thought, yes, why not? I can just do it myself. And the other part of it was the other half of this book is a journal. It's a journal from like Liz and Jennifer's father, and the pictures were drawn by their mother to explain their family history. Because once Jennifer's power to give ghosts and demons a body wakes up, he just hands his journal to her and leaves. So she's got to figure out what happened in their past, why she has these powers with her sister who won't talk to her, and heal their bond. So the first book is all about them coming back together, healing their broken family, and trying to figure out where their dad is and save him.
Nice. Well, I hope a bunch of people, go and check this book out. It sounds absolutely phenomenal. So
Thank you so much. I hope they do too. I can't wait to work on Jennifer Strange and the Red Gate. That's going to be a fun book. I'm excited.
awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be back with you.
Absolutely glad to have you back. So up next, we have Marc Monroe, who is a Southern supernatural horror writer. He was originally going to write contemporary fantasy, but after a dream that jolted him awake 5 years ago, he writes horror. When he's not scaring himself writing, he enjoys molding the minds of tomorrow as a high school theater teacher, because the world needs more moldy little minds. He's also close to perfecting Taco Tuesday and loves iced coffee, English bulldogs, and domestic bobtail stray cats. While I can't entirely get on board with your appreciation of bulldogs, tacos and cats are two fandoms which I can fully participate with. I've been having some interesting theater conversation with some other horror friends. One of the really fascinating takes was that this current unpleasantness has turned us all into ghosts in the way that we communicate with one another. How do you see theater evolving to meet current and future needs?
Well, thanks for giving me such a great question. Jesus. Um,
No pressure.
I have to use my master's for this. Well, anytime that there's this major event in the world, the artist community is going to be the first ones to reach out and to process it and then put out a new way of thinking, or to show the way that people are thinking. It happened after World War II, and it will definitely happen after this. So I think we're going to see a lot of introspective things coming out, maybe due to the fact that we can't be in large numbers on stage. We might see more one-person shows, two-person shows. There's no telling. The theater community is such a creative group that there's no.
Not going to be able to keep them down.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've been grappling with having caught and recovered from the virus. How has this affected your creativity?
Wow, that's a really big thing. I've been actually working on a memoir to deal with this, because it really hit me in my family. I thought it was going to take away some of my family members. It has taken away some of my family members outside of my immediate family. I thought it was going to take my job. It really showed me how much control we don't have. So it really made me feel really small. And so I'm learning a lot about myself. I thought I knew who I was at the beginning of this, but I realized that after the pandemic, not only am I not sure, that I actually might need therapy as well. So I don't know.
Well, and yeah, there's a shame and a stigma in therapy that probably shouldn't be there. Maybe this will, maybe one of the good things that can come out of this is unbundling our societal shame that, no, thinking that, we kind of need somebody neutral to talk to and, work out our turmoil.
I definitely agree with that. Shame is actually a big part of the memoir that I'm working on. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it once you've got that put together. So now, why don't you tell us a little bit about your reading before you take us in? You're reading something from your book?
Yes, I'm reading a selection from my book, Ghost of Black Bear Mountain by Marc Monroe. And it's set in 1964. And this is the dream that I had that changed my life, I guess you could say. But it deals with Matt Christian, who is a teacher at the lowest point of his life. He's lost his family due to death, and he's lost his job due to a variety of drugs, everywhere from sleeping pills to LSD. And so he took the only job that he could find, which is in a small rural mine town in eastern Kentucky. And it's called Midwood. And the thing about this town is that everything's governed by the daylight. And it's governed by odd rules on top of that. And he's been having a really rough couple of days due to the drugs and things that are happening, and he's not sure what's real and what's not real. And he had a really rocky start with the kids. They made up. He was going to send them all home, but none of them turned in their homework, and he is now keeping them late. And like I said, time is of the essence. And this is actually set in November, so daylight savings time was in effect, and it's time to go home, but the kids are still in school. So here we go. Excuse me. 30 minutes later, the jagged shadows of the dead trees were sprawling out along the floor of the schoolhouse. With every second and every inch of the shadow's invasion, the children became more and more tense. The constant glances out the window annoyed me. No one had turned in their work. Their wide eyes darted from me to each other, then back to the windows. "Focus on your work," I commanded for the 100th time. "Mr. Christian," whined Scarlett. "What?" I mocked. She shrank down in her desk. "If we don't leave soon, we're going to have to stay here." "Don't be ridiculous," I said. "My father told me if I ever get stuck somewhere before it gets dark to stay there, no matter where I am." "Are we going to stay here tonight?" Weezer asked. "Class, it's not even dark yet. This is nonsense." The children chattered, becoming more and more excited. Jason stood. "Y'all, the sun sets at 5:32, and in Valley time, it's going to be 5 o'clock. There ain't going to be no sun. My daddy's going to be pissed." "Jason, sit down. I have no idea why the town has embedded these tales in your head." Jason pointed to me. "The ghost children are real, teacher." The class erupted in emotional agreement, their words and cries blending into a child's hellish chorus. I took off my glasses and rubbed my face. "There are no such things as ghosts." "Don't talk about them like that. They might hear you," warned Weezer. "What if they're already outside?" "And they heard him," gasped Scarlett. "What if they get mad?" exclaimed Weezer. I threw my glasses back on and held up my hands to the class. "There are no ghost children. There are no, what's his name, Joshua Johnson." The class went silent and stared at the window. The mine whistle blew. I hesitated and moved to the window. The still and quiet of my class made my steps loud. Why did they blow the mine whistle this late? The whistle blew again and the class shuddered. "The double mine whistle," Amy shouted. The students became hysterical. "What does it mean?" I asked, raising my voice, attempting to be heard. "It means to get home," Amy declared. Big City, you are gonna get it, teacher, Jason said, shaking his head. It was a losing battle. I was a fool to think that they were going to complete any work under these circumstances. A desk slid and crashed against the wall, and the whole class jumped. Montana stood brooding. Mr. Christian, we have less than 15 minutes. It's time to go home. I'm taking Amy home. Illiterate or illiterate, I had had enough. Fine, I erupted and threw up my hands. Run! Run for your lives! Beware of the ghosts! The children pushed each other to get out of the door first, pushing and shoving to the point of savagery, knowing that freedom was only beyond the door. One girl elbowed a small boy in the face. I expected him to come crying to me, but he didn't. He just held his hand over his injured eye and continued the charge. In less than a minute, the entire schoolhouse was empty. I looked around the room in shock. Most of the children hadn't even taken their belongings. One student had even left their shoes. I went to the board and picked up a piece of chalk and wrote, "Town foolishness. Number 1, never turn your back on an open window, period. Number 2, never go out after the sun comes up or after the sun goes down, period. Number 3, unknown." Stepping back, I studied the words and read them aloud. I looked out the window. It was indeed dusk. I was perplexed and angered, but still, the longer I stood there, the more I played over the strange events that had occurred to me since I had moved to Midwood. The animals, the dreams, the voices, the feeling of someone reaching out to touch me when no one was there. The strange little girls that came knocking at my door last night. I hummed while I looked around the room. The wind was picking up. It was cold, but it was more than that. I was uneasy.
So never serves well to ignore ghosts. So
when you're high and you hear the colors and you see the sounds.
So what can we expect from you next? Along with are you working on anything other than the memoir?
Speaking of the pandemic, I think I'm assuming that most people started about 100 different things and they stopped 100 different things in between watching the news and watching what was going on and dealing with their sickness and their families. So I think the next thing, the most important thing will be my memoir, which right now I'm kind of shopping around, but it's called Did I Kill My Mother? But I noticed there is actually a lot of isolation horror kind of in it, even though it is nonfiction. So I'm just wondering how much truth I want to tell.
Yeah, it's always tough. So, but thank you again for joining us tonight and sharing, your stories, both fiction and non.
Absolutely.
So our next special guest is from the newly formed Wisconsin chapter, is Sarah Reed. Sarah's short stories can be found in various places, including Ellen Datlow's Best Horror of the Year, volumes 10 and 12. A collection of her short fiction called Out of Water is available now from Trepidado Publishing, as is her debut novel, The Bone Weaver's Orchard, both nominated for the Bram Stoker, This Is Horror, and Ladies of Horror Fiction Awards. Bone Weaver's Orchard won the Stoker for Superior Achievement in a First Novel, and the This Is Horror Award for Novel of the Year. When she's not staring into the abyss, she knits, and you can find her online on Instagram and Twitter at Inkwell Monster, or on her site at inkwellmonster.wordpress.com. So I'm a particular fan of short fiction, and Out of Water was one of my favorite collections from last year. And I know that spiders are close to your heart, but they didn't really make a significant appearance in your collection. What do you think impacted this, and do you have any plans to address this deficit of spiders?
Well, my novel's full of them, They're everywhere in there. And I'm actually working on a spider story right now. So there's more spiders coming, don't worry.
Awesome. The cover for Out of Water is so wonderfully moody and evocative, and there's many lessons to be gleaned from this collection. You know, never trust the Fae, never trust your body. The lovely Endoskeletal is a story just chock full of disturbed funerary sites and poetic body horror, and it's inhabited by well-drawn characters and tense pacing, and Still Life with Natalie was another of my favorites. It makes a valiant call to revitalize our traditions of visiting old cemeteries. But do you have a favorite cemetery to visit?
Well, I mean, this is maybe a morbid question with a morbid answer. My favorite cemetery to visit is the one where my grandparents are buried.
Okay.
It's in Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania. I actually have not been there since my grandmother passed away in March. Obviously, we couldn't have a funeral. She was, buried without ceremony, and I am just waiting for things to get better so I can go and sit with her.
Understandable. Yeah, there's a cemeteries, previously inhabited a big part of the green space of our culture, and it was more accepted and natural for us to go and spend time in those places and make connections. So I love how you pull them into your stories. So why don't you set us up before taking us into your reading?
Well, I'm going to read the prologue from my novel, The Bone Weaver's Orchard.
Awesome.
And it takes place at Dunley Abbey in North Yorkshire, 1926. Charlie Winslow pressed his teeth together to keep them from cracking as the car grated along the stone lane to the ancient abbey. His fresh pine tack box weighed heavily on his bony knees. The glass jars inside clinked and rang like small bells. He tried to keep them steady, imagining the terror in the hundreds of eyes inside. You must be even colder than I am. He pulled a yellow linen scarf from his neck, untangling it from the length of twine that suspended his numbered card. He held the scarf briefly to his nose and breathed deeply before lifting the lid of his box and tucking the cloth carefully around his specimens. The scenery outside his window had changed from sweeping fields to dry brush and stone, wind-swept shrubs that seemed to want to tear themselves up from the land. Their roots are strong, deep. Maybe this wind will carry me away. The great stone edifice emerged from the rock of the moor, black against the sky. At the center of the roof, a tower rose, its bell a silhouette in its carven frame. Lit windows dotted the abbey's long corridor arms, stretching across dark lawns. They have electric lights. His gaze traced the shape of the building by their glow. One wing remained dark, windows black and empty, so the whole of it was nearly invisible in the darkness until its shadow stretched across the car. Charlie peered up at its stained bricks and shuddered. The driver slowed the car, and the millstone wheels ground to a halt in the gravel. The man snugged his cap down tight against the wind and got out. Charlie heard the crash of his trunk hitting the stones. His door sprang open and a rush of cold stole his breath. "Does they need help with your case?" the driver asked, reaching for the pine box. "No." Charlie gripped the rough wood closer to his chest and slid from the seat to the drive. He swayed, unaccustomed to the sudden stillness around him. He'd been a body in motion for months, from Cairo to Algiers to sea, through the straits, north and north again, colder and colder to Portsmouth, then by train, north and colder, through London and York, then in the car, north again and colder still to these dark moors and the reaching stone arms of the Old Cross School for Boys. His body didn't know how to be still. He tried to steady himself and felt the driver's hand on his shoulder. "Watch the sun up the steps, lad. Pull the bell and Miss Mary will see thou'rt fed and warmed. He nudged Charlie toward the tall doors. The wind shrieked, plucking Charlie's battered tag from the twine around his neck and carrying it off into the dark. His heart leapt as if to chase it, until he remembered he didn't need it anymore. Don't lose your tag, his father had said. It's how they'll get you to the right place. From where he was standing, the school seemed to take up the whole sky. He couldn't even see any stars. How can this be the right place? The gravel became flagstones and the stones became stairs as the face of the old abbey towered over him. In the shelter of those rough stones, the howl of the wind quieted to a distant moan. Charlie felt the cold of the stone through his shoes. He hoisted his box and imagined he could hear the enraged scurrying of 1,000 chitinous legs. He squeezed it to his chest and hoped his heartbeat might calm them, that his body might somehow keep them warm in this icy wind. He pulled the bell with his teeth. The car's guttural engine idled as the driver waited to confirm that his charge had been delivered. Charlie rested his chin on the pine, caught a whiff of its bitter freshness, and wondered if the jars inside might have saved him one last breath of Cairo. The door's hinges screamed, and a seam of light appeared in the center of its wide panel. Charlie started, straightened, and knew that the hammering of his heart would only stir his charges more. The car pulled away, digging into the gravel and vanishing into the dark. The headlamps shrank to pinpricks across the moor. Charlie felt as though the lifeline was being unwound from his heart. A lean woman in a black dress stood behind the door. Her pinched face was lit in flickering silhouette from a nearby candle. Her small eyes darted from Charlie to his box, the worn trunk on the stones behind him. Term doesn't start for days yet, she said, holding the door as if to close it again. Wait, ma'am, I don't have anywhere else to go, or any way to get there if I did. Charlie's back was beginning to ache from the heavy box. The woman's thin lip curled. The village is 3 miles down the lane. This isn't a hotel. Someone there will take you in. Please, I don't know anyone in the village. I don't even know what it's called. I've just come from Cairo where my father, he sent me away. He sent me here. Charlie felt his face begin to heat. If he'd had any money, he'd have turned and walked those 3 miles and bought a ticket south, as many tickets south as it took to get back to his father. The pinched woman sighed. I guess you'd best come inside. I'll send someone for your trunk. She opened the door wide, and Charlie stepped through the stone arch into the school. The door swung shut behind him with a bang like a fortress cannon. Your name? The woman in black lifted her candle from a small stand that supported a marble bust. The side of the statue's face was blackened as if by 100 brief encounters with the candle. Charlie Winslow, he said. Wait here. I'll find where you're meant to go, she said, and left, taking the light with her. No, you won't. Not here. He'd never felt so out of place before. In the darkness, he felt the heaviness of stone all around him like a tomb. He felt the hollowness of the long halls, cold as a lost knife and dark as a throat. The rustling inside his box sounded like a whisper.
So I heard the spiders in the background there. That's where they are.
Yeah, they're always close by. They're never far.
So what are you working on now? What can we expect from you next?
Well, I have a new novel that I am working on some edits with an agent that will hopefully someday go somewhere. And I have a lot of short stories in the works. And all of them are due like in the next, 6 weeks or so. So I'm actually, I'm going to be holding myself up next weekend and not seeing anyone or talking to anyone and just trying to finish as many of them as I can in time to turn them in.
And you get a good mug of tea and just hunker down and knock those out. Well,
exactly.
Looking forward to reading those stories and seeing everywhere where that they land. So
thank you.
Really love what you do, and that's a perfect entry to a book. If winning the Stoker wasn't enough of a reason to encourage folks to go pick that up, hopefully hearing this will push them in that direction.
Thanks.
Thank you again for joining us tonight.
For having me. It's so nice to join you all.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care.
So our final reader tonight is Jessica Ann York. Jessica's debut short story came out earlier this year in the excellent Cemetery Gates anthology, Places We Fear to Tread. Then she collaborated with 2 other chapter members on Pseudopod's Halloween treat, What We Talk About When We Talk About Cooking Country. And she's got another story coming out later this month in Bastarian. She assists the chapter as webmaster and getting this content that you're watching right now polished and up on YouTube. So you worked very closely with Kitty Sarkozy and Jamie Grimes to create a haunted SEO blog post and a haunted NPR interview. What did you enjoy most from the collaborative process, and what lessons will you take into future collaborations?
Yeah, that was my first collaboration ever. And I think one of my favorite parts of it was just how open the group was to rewrites and trying new things and being open to like big sections being written by different people. I think we had like 3 different drafts at one point that we combined into a final draft. So it was just really cool to see how open and relaxed the 3 of us were. And we also had like completely different strengths. In my opinion, I think Jamie had this amazing voice that he gave to the character. I think I helped as far as like getting conflict and stakes in the story. And Kitty brought it together with just her awesome positive energy and the beautiful photos she got for the blog post. It's framed as an actual blog post, so you can scroll through and it looks like it was written by the main character. But yeah.
And cookies.
And cookies. Yeah, she made those cookies. So it was fun.
It doesn't require you to murder anybody to eat them.
Maybe.
So Places We Fear to Tread focuses on liminal spaces that allow for crossover between our world and other less pleasant places. What was the real world liminal space that inspired your story in that one?
Yeah, I write a lot about Southern women because I am a Southern woman, which ties really nicely back to that cooking country story. But I had actually written the short story that appears at Places We Fear to Tread. I had written it for my thesis, and it was based on the dam that I grew up as a kid. Like a lot of people ask me, like, why do you like horror? And I think it's just because I grew up in a really rural area with lots of caves and rivers and lakes. And so I was constantly in the mud, crawling around, getting into stuff as a child. But I just happened to have my story, Women of the Mirror, that was based on a real life location that I grew up at. And I saw the call and submitted and got an acceptance within an hour from Joe Sullivan, who is a great editor and gets back to people like that. He's constantly putting out awesome content. He accepted one of my other stories that'll be coming out in Campfire Macabre in January, which is really exciting. But yeah, the inspiration came from my hometown and just growing up in rural Middle Tennessee.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you want to set up for this before taking us into your reading?
Nope, I think I'm good to go. Thank you, Alex.
Over to you.
This is Women of the Mirror. There was once a stubborn old woman who refused to leave her home after she was told a dam would be built on top of it. Eve's dad always starts his story this way. Cricket and Junebug chirps echo off the War-Trace Dam on these damp Tennessee summer nights whenever she follows him onto the back porch to stare into the trapped water of the man-made lake. Eve's dad can't help himself. He loves scaring her, and Eve loves to try and not be scared. They live about 15 minutes away from the nearest town. Coyote cries and owl screeches are as numerous as the stars. Eve's dad's stories used to send her into her room shivering afterwards, but now she's in the 4th grade, and she's proud she can keep her eyes from watering and her skin from prickling whenever she looks outside at the lake. The War-Trace Dam and its sharp monochrome colors at night have always done this to her, even before she was old enough to speak or understand what water was. It's as if the woman had been staring up at Eve, and perhaps all little girls, from the lake since before man made up a story about her. Before Eve or her father had lived there, before there was a dam or a lake, before there was a word for water or father. Time and time again, Eve will sit in her dad's lap and squeeze at his rough hands as he tells her story about the old woman, as all fathers have always done. And each and every time, his story ends with, "I'm so glad you're a good little girl who listens to her father and who knows not to go without me to the water." This summer, Eve decides she wants to be scarier than the old woman in her father's stories. She sprints through the fields beside the lake, pretending the tall strands of grass are an army of disembodied green hands reaching to hold her down. The June bug's wings glisten like oil on fiery pavement when they shoot up out of her way. Eve grasps for them. She imagines if she collects enough of their iridescent shells inside her pockets, she'll use them to create a totem to ward away the old woman, and she'll never be scared again. The shells gather and pile in a secret jewelry box hidden in Eve's room until fall comes and the June bugs retreat from the fields as the tall grass is turned into hay bales by tractors. Eve hates these tractors, and one evening as they leave the field, she flings herself at one of the new hay bales they've made. The straw nips and creeps up into her clothes. Eve throws herself at the bale over and over, each time sliding down to the bottom before starting again. She keeps on like this until the sky grows dark. She's determined to defeat the disembodied hand she'd imagined during the summer, and she can't stop thinking about how she'll tell her dad about climbing all the way to the top of the bale by herself. She pants and growls, too focused on victory to remember to be scared of the woman in the lake that watches her from several yards away. Right when she finally has her toes and fingers firmly gripped into the hay, her chin just barely high enough to see beyond the straw, Eve's dad sneaks up behind her. She's panting so loud she doesn't hear his approach. Mid-air, he pulls Eve to the ground and shrieks directly into her ear, sending her into a fit of hysteric sobs. When the two come home and Eve walks through the door still crying, her mom, Lynn, has her fists knotted in her gray hair. "I can't believe you let Eve keep playing in that hay for such a mean prank." Lynn's voice is always soft, like the veiny insides of a newborn rabbit's ears. But tonight it's more like a growl as she says, "Her legs are going to be covered in rashes for a solid week. Look, she's already starting to break out." "Oh, stop being so sour, woman," Eve's dad says. He drops down next to Eve and wraps an arm around her shoulder. "You're fine, right? You're my tough little fighter." Eve wipes her face, suddenly aware that her dad and mom may think she's crying because she's scared. "I am, yeah," Eve says. "But Dad, did you see how I was about to?" He pats her hard on the back, pulling her into a tight hug before she can finish. "See, that's my girl," he says. Eve's face burns against her dad's chest. The first itches begin to teethe across her skin as he continues patting her back. "Hey, want to hear the story about the little girl who got lost in the hay?" Eve's dad says. "Yes," she lies. Would he think Eve wasn't tough anymore if she said no? "No, y'all, not tonight," Lynn says. "You're going to get us in trouble if Eve ever tells her teachers about all these awful stories you keep repeating. Knock it off." "Oh, she's fine, she's fine." Eve's dad tickles her sides, causing some of the hay inside her clothes to scratch her. "Isn't that right, Eve?" "Stop it. Eve, promise me you won't play in the hay again. And I want to put itch cream on you before you go to bed." "Let her be, Lynn," Eve's dad says. "There's no need to dramatize a little rash." As the fight continues, Eve sneaks off to bed, relieved for an excuse to skip out on another late night story. She is fast asleep when she is startled awake by Lynn's slimy hands rubbing itch cream against her legs. "I used to want to play in the hay too," Lynn says, "but it just breaks our sensitive skin out too much. Don't do it again." The moonlight pouring into Eve's dark bedroom seems to glow on Lynn's face. Eve, too exhausted and sore to respond, grumbles and tries to pull away from Lynn's cold, cream-coated fingers. For a while, she struggles to keep rolling away, but then finally dips back into sleep. When she wakes up, Lynn is gone, and enough time has passed through the night that the layers of cream have somehow managed to sink into her skin. Eve stretches her arms out across her sheets, then flinches when she feels strands of hay brush against her skin. She sits up in the dark, tiny heart lodged inside her throat, and sees that a perfect circle of straw has been placed around her body. almost like a bird's nest. The June bug wings she's been collecting are scattered like jewels across it. Mom? Eve whispers. Dad? Her bedroom door is wide open from where Lynn entered the room earlier in the night, but the moonlight reveals Eve is alone. Did her dad walk by in the middle of the night, find the door open, and decide to play another trick on her? At first, Eve wants to rush out of her bed to lock the door before her dad shows up to complete his creepy joke. But when what she thinks is Lynn's silhouette enters the doorway, she settles back down in her sheets. Mama, could you please shut? The woman drops onto all fours. Eve goes silent. A gnawing sound crawls into the room with the woman. Something rolls back and forth inside her toothless mouth. As Eve shrinks back into her pillows, the old woman creeps forward faster until light from the window refracts off her naked, pale body. The smell of lake saturates the room. Streams of water drip down the rolls of her glistening, bloated skin. Eve feels a tight pinch in her stomach. All she can see now are the old woman's starlit-colored irises and the gummy smile that peels upward around the hay inside her mouth. Still on all fours, the old woman trots toward the foot of Eve's bed and drops the straw at the girl's feet. Eve faints from the pain in her stomach. When she wakes in the morning, the old woman is gone, but something gray now covers the inside of her legs and sheets. It's silvery and ripe, like fat from a fish. Her stomach still aches, and the jewelry box is wide open underneath her bed.
It's a fantastic story, and really awesome that it gets to close the anthology out. So do you want to tell us just a little bit about the anthology coming out in January?
Yeah, it's super cool. It's also from Cemetery Gates, and it is a flash anthology featuring, oh my gosh, all sorts of big names, and I wish I could remember the amount of sections, but there's individual sections dedicated to specific types of horror stories. And my story, the Lake of Poppets, is featured in the witchcraft section. So I'm excited to see that in January.
Awesome. That should be a fun anthology. Well, thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, that brings our event to a close. The Southern Nightmares reading series will be a monthly online event presented by HWA Atlanta Chapter, spotlighting Horror Writers Association members from Atlanta and around the world. Please join us again on the evening of December 17th for another reading series. Our featured guest will be Tony Serecchia, whose Harry Strange audio drama will be Atlanta HWA's Nightmare of the Month. Our special guests will be Karen Bovenmeyer and Wendy Ann Wagner. Completing the lineup will be Atlanta's Kelly Frank and David Powell. Until then, honor Halloween in your heart and try and keep it all the year. See you next month, y'all.